Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's QI Power Hour. This is Caroline Beck with the Saskatchewan Health Quality Council. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, QI Power Hour is a free monthly webinar series hosted by the Health Quality Council here in Saskatchewan. We bring together improvers from a variety of sectors with an interest in improving health and to learn more about quality improvement related topics. All of our sessions are recorded and available on the HQC website following the event. Please feel free to share these recordings with your colleagues who are unable to join us in person today, or feel free to check out some past sessions that you may have missed. While you're on our HQC website, we also invite you to sign up for our distribution list to ensure that you receive regular invites to all of our upcoming QI Power Hour sessions. Over the last year, we've been really excited to see the continued growth of QI Power Hour throughout our home province here in Saskatchewan, within Canada, and even abroad. So thanks for spending an hour of your time with us here today and for your commitment to ongoing learning to improve the systems that you're each a part of. We're looking forward to your engagement and your participation on the webinar today. We encourage folks to share their questions and insights during today's session by making use of the chat function. You can access the chat function by clicking on the message bubble towards the bottom of your screen. This will launch the chat panel on the right side of your screen. We encourage you to share your questions, your comments, and your ideas throughout the presentation. Just a note also that we'll also have some time dedicated to questions and answers at the end of today's presentation. So please send along your questions to all participants so that we can all join in the discussion. Let's take a quick moment to practice this function by typing in the chat the name of the organization that you're joining us from today. Oh, got someone joining us from the Saskatchewan Health Authority in the north. North Battleford area, more Saskatchewan Health Authority from all different parts of the province, Alberta Health Services, welcome. Maritimes, SPOR unit, great, welcome. Thanks so much, everyone. We're so glad that you could join us here today. We also invite you to tweet today about your insights and your reflections during the session. You can use the handles and the hashtags that you see on your screen here today, and they're also going to be shared out here in the chat for you to be able to refer back to in case you can't write down quite as quick as we're moving through these slides. So with that, let's dive into our session for today. I'm delighted to welcome our presenter. Stephanie Roy McCallum is the Chief Storm Rider at the Courageous Leadership Project, where she steps into the storm of high emotion and conflict and rides it to clearer skies. She is an internationally recognized trailblazer who has worked on 5 continents, facilitating tough conversations on high-stakes, high-emotion issues. As a trained coactive leadership coach, she brings 25 years of experience in bringing people together to build new perspectives and to collaboratively create brave solutions, growing their own leadership and capacity. Stephanie sees a world where a new kind of leader is needed, willing to have brave, honest conversations about the things that matter most. When leaders show up with fierce courage, open hearts, and a deep commitment to integrity, groups can move from stuck to possible. Stephanie believes that brave, honest conversations are how we'll solve the challenges in our world together. So welcome, Stephanie, and thanks for joining us for today's QI Power Hour. We'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled with the participation, too, on the webinar. I'm so glad when people take just a couple minutes out of their day to think about how do we be in these conversations with each other. So I want to start with actually the title of this webinar, which is about bravely leading challenging conversations. Like Carolyn said, I believe really strongly that our ability to be in brave, honest conversations, to have these discussions with each other is a core leadership skill. And while I believe that really strongly, unfortunately, I think that no one is born knowing how to have these conversations. You know, you don't come with that button built in. Oh, now I need to talk about tough stuff. Let's see, I just turn that button on and then there we go. I also think too that bravely leading challenging conversations is not for the faint of heart. Some of these conversations will be some of the hardest work you will ever do, sitting down with people to talk about the stuff that's hardest to get into, the things that touches our hearts, that causes us the most pain or fear or anxiety. There's a reason why challenging conversations are challenging conversations. They come laden with other people's emotions, with an uncertain outcome, and with sometimes a fear and trepidation about where do we even begin? How do we even start having the conversation? So I'm deeply curious. I ask this question at the start of every webinar I do. I'm deeply curious, what made you say yes to a webinar about bravely leading challenging conversations? So I'll just give you a minute to put your answers in the chat room. I would love to see some people's thoughts about, what made you say yes, why you chose to be in this particular webinar, what's going on for you in your work or your life or your community that seems to feel like bravely leading challenging conversations was the thing you needed to learn more about. So I'll give you a second to enter your thoughts in the chat room, and I'm really curious to hear what people say. When I've asked this question before, I have had people say, I think I need to have a conversation in my organization because my values aren't aligning with the values of the organization. Or maybe it seems that the organization has values, but we're not really living those. I've heard from people answer this question and say that they're really concerned about public outrage and public opposition and how they are characterized and how people interact with them. I've had someone sign on to a webinar and say, my mother is dying and we need to have a conversation in my family about this. So for lots of motivation and different reasons. So here's some of the things people have said. I'm in a new role with new peers and thought it would be valuable to learn new skills. These conversations are scary to me and I need to build skills. Thank you very much. Always interested in learning how to step into these conversations. I believe this is a valuable skill for my professional and personal life. You never know when you need to be prepared. Absolutely. How to manage employees where increasing my skills with difficult conversation will have a positive effect. A lack of trust in the healthcare system and managing the challenges of change. Thank you so much for sharing those things about workplace dynamics and your ability to gain some confidence in having the tough conversations and really meeting people where they're at so that we can talk about these important conversations. So thanks very much for your input. When Carolyn introduced me, she said that one of the things I believe in are brave, honest conversations are how we solve the problems in our organizations, our communities, and our lives. But I think more than that, I want to pull that statement apart a little bit and offer that I think the act of being in brave, honest conversations creates connection, it builds understanding, and it increases trust. So I want to say that again because I think it really matters to hammer home that point. When we are in brave, honest conversations with our work colleagues, with our family, with our community members, with our stakeholders, our patients, and our family members, when we have brave, honest conversations, we create connection, we build understanding, and we increase trust. And here's the thing I have learned in 25 years of doing this work, that when those three things are present, connection, understanding, and trust, anything is possible. You can solve any problem, and you can do it together with people who might have started out in totally polarized sides on totally different sides of a particular issue. If those three things are not present, you cannot solve problems. For sure, you can't solve them in sustainable ways. And that goes to situations where change is coming, whether it's positive or negative change, depending on people's perspective. When we have these conversations and we create these things because we're in it together, we actually create that sense of we're in it together. We're here to help solve these problems together. We build commitment as well. And I think that some of the things we have been doing over the last number of years, they're not working anymore. And perhaps they did work at one time and they were effective, but we need a new way to address the complex challenges we face. I like to say that all the easy problems have been solved, and so now we're left with the really tough, messy ones. That someone has a comment that says healthcare is in a major state of change. And that's absolutely true. And it's not just in healthcare, it's in every aspect of our world. And so what we've done in the past, it isn't working, and the times are different, which means we need a new kind of leadership. So I want to be clear that when I'm talking about a new kind of leadership, I'm not necessarily talking about the folks who are, hold the positions in the hierarchy or up the food chain. I'm not talking about just leader with a capital L, if you want to think about it like that. I'm talking about each of us because I believe that leadership is a choice about how you choose to show up in the world, in your work and in your life. And so I'm talking about the leader in all of us and the choice we make and the choices we can make to bravely lead these kinds of conversations. So I want to be clear that when I use that word leadership, I'm talking about you, regardless of the position you hold. It's about the choices you make and how you show up to lead these conversations. So I want to take a little poll. I'm curious, and so I'm going to ask you to just take a breath before you answer the poll and think honestly about your organization. Are you talking openly and honestly about the really tough issues in your organization? So you have a minute to respond to that, and I'd like to see your answers, just the yes or the no. And I know everyone always wants the maybe answer, but I'm just going to ask you to pick. Mostly are you or mostly are you not? Your thoughts about whether you're talking honestly and openly about the really tough issues in your organization. I did facilitated a leadership event a couple of years ago for a national healthcare organization in Canada. And I asked that question, are you talking openly and honestly about the really tough issues? And what issues are you not talking about? And in a lot of organizations, there is a deep gap between the words we say we believe in and the actions that we take. So in this particular organization, they had stated values of collaboration and inclusion. And what came out in the conversation, in the tough conversation, was that actually how they operated and the actions that they took were not living up to those values whatsoever. They were command and control. And so that's a conversation that they needed to have, they needed to step into. Okay, so the poll results are in. Thank you very much for taking a moment to respond and think about it. 37% of you said yes. You are talking openly and honestly about the tough issues in your organization. 29% of you said no. And then I have 35% that said, I don't know what no A is. So I'm going to get Carolyn to tell us what. Oh, no answer. 35% of you had no answer. There you go. I couldn't see the full screen there. So some of you who are uncertain, what's your answer to that question? 37% saying yes, you're talking. So congratulations to that 37% of you that are actually stepping into this space and holding these conversations. And to the 29% of you who said no, thanks for your honesty and being open about what's really happening. I have a colleague, Rick Tamlin, who I've worked with for years, who says that life goes in the direction of the conversations we are having. So I want you to think about that in the context of your organization, that that could mean like talking about the tough stuff, reconciling the tensions, trying to figure out innovative ways of solving complex challenges, or it could mean just complaining or voicing concerns or focusing on negativity and the challenges of a given situation. Your life goes in the direction of the things you are talking about. The other thing to note is that I'm a really firm believer that the things we do not talk about are the things that cause us harm. When we can shine a light on something that's really tough, there's the potential that we could actually build understanding, create connection, increase trust, and find a solution to that problem. But if we're not talking about it, we can't do it. I always think it's a really good test of whether there's an issue we need to talk about. If you think about the issues that are being talked about at the water cooler or on break or out in the parking lot, but aren't being put on the staff meeting agenda or the all-staff forum, if those conversations, those topics don't reconcile, then you could have a challenge. So just ask yourself some of those questions. What are the conversations you're having and what are the ones you're not and that you should be talking about? In the context of leadership, of bravely leading challenging conversations, I really think that the time we are living in right now presents a real opportunity. That I like to say that outrage is the new norm. And so people in our organizations and in our communities, they are stressed and overwhelmed, and their emotional temperature is at a higher level, I think, than it ever has been before. There's so much reactivity. I like this, I don't like this, that sort of sense of voting versus understanding and deliberating on a particular issue. And I think that it's a absolutely human response that in that kind of environment, one of the things we often do is seek to control or manage the situation. And very often that seeking to control or manage is demonstrated with a focus on facts or information, sort of telling people how we need them to behave or what we need to do, rather than working with people about how they feel about the uncertainty or the challenge that they are facing. I also think in the time that we're working in, we're in this beautiful moment of opportunity and shift about what does it actually mean to be a leader in this space, and what is the times that we're living in requiring from us or calling for from us. And if you think about leaders that really resonate with you or leaders that really inspire you, they show up as human beings. So they demonstrate feelings rather than this myth that we carry that you're unprofessional if you feel strongly about something. And so I just want to sort of plant the seeds that that there's maybe a different way for us to think about how we want to show up in this space, step into the conversations that we need to have, and based on what the times are calling for from us right now. I like to think that when you kind of gather your courage and you step in, a new way of measuring your success in the work that you are doing is whether you're working with the chaos and emotion rather than managing or controlling it. I often say that you're lucky if you can manage or control your own emotions and how you show up, much less manage or control other people. It's not possible to manage or control other people. And so if you can just be in the conversation and you can step into it with courage and embrace how other people feel about it and make a choice to show up with courage and compassion and integrity as a leader, it's actually possible you might build that understanding, create the connection, increase the trust, so you can find solutions together. I just want to offer a short sort of story or an example around this that speaks directly to these three things. A number of years ago, I did a project for the Horizon Health Network, and I don't know if anybody from New Brunswick is on the call right now, but I welcome your comments or thoughts on this if you participated in this project. And this project went over a number of years, but it was a project related to something New Brunswick has called the active offer, which is a legislated requirement to actually make an offer to all patients to say hello, bonjour, so that patients can choose what language they would like to be served in. One of the challenges that was happening inside the organization, so in all the hospitals and the healthcare facilities in Horizon, was that it was creating enormous amounts of tension. So people were not actually talking together, employees weren't talking together about how they felt about the active offer. They were taking sides and only speaking with people on their side, if you can call it. So folks who were against the active offer were talking about how they felt forced, or they thought it was unfair, or they felt like they were losing out, they were intimidated, they were fearful, they were uncertain. And folks who were on the, yes, we should be doing this side were sort of like a little bit righteous and were committed maybe to service. And maybe it was familiar to them because they, in fact, had no fear about what would happen if someone did respond in French or English. So we initiated a process where staff, we created space for staff to talk about their experiences. And when they talked about their stories, their experiences, their assumptions, their feelings, we created a space of understanding where suddenly they saw each other in different ways, which reduced the conflict, created connection, and created a possibility for a shift. So across the organization, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people entered into these conversations, and that was counter to a choice of just telling people what they needed to do and forcing compliance because compliance wasn't happening. And so when you have a thing that needs to be talked about, you need to actually crack open the conversation so that people can feel how they feel about it, share their stories and their experiences in order to create a shift and solve the problem, rather than just managing or controlling the situation and thinking that your way forward is to share information or facts about how people might need to behave. Just going to take a breath for 1 second. If there is anybody from Horizon on the call, I'd love to know if you are familiar with that project. Thanks. So let me ask you this. What is a brave, honest conversation anyway? I've been using those 3 words for the last couple of minutes. I've talked about bravely leading challenging conversations. So when you think about your work and your experience, what is a brave, honest conversation to you? How would you define it? What needs to be present? I'm going to encourage you to answer in the chat box. And what comes up for you? Or actually spend a minute thinking about when you have been in a conversation you might define as brave and honest. What did it feel like, since we're talking about embracing emotion? A willingness to be vulnerable. Thank you very much. Yeah, an ability to really talk about the tough stuff and show up as your whole self. What else comes to mind for you about a brave, honest conversation? I've had other people say an ability to check your ego so that you're not focused on being an expert or having the answers, that you're actually fully present. Someone else has said being okay with not getting everything right. Fantastic. Calling out the elephant in the room. What else is there? Taking a step back and listening to understand. Absolutely. Liberating, a sense of clearing the air. It's astonishing the impact a brave, honest conversation can have. Being willing not to know. Straight up conversation. Respectful, compassionate, even when difficult. I go into the conversation willing to change my mind, not anticipating the results. Oh, fantastic answers. I would love to be in a brave, honest conversation with each of you based on what's coming up here. Deep listening to understand, being compassionate, no agenda. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's what comes to mind when you think about a brave, honest conversation. So I wanted to share, I spent some time, I've been doing this work for 25 years, and I spent some time thinking about, for me, what's a brave, honest conversation? What is required for it to be present? So here's what goes into my list. Now, you may have things that you would add or change or adjust on a brave, honest conversation to you. So number 1 for me is to practice courageous leadership, to actually make a choice to lead with courage and with compassion. To work with the whole system. You know, when I say that brave, honest conversations are how we solve the problems in our world, I'm talking explicitly about problems that are not easily solved. And so you need to look for the connections between issues and not focus on the weeds, but actually look at the forest and go wide. How do these things connect to each other? Wait, what's happening in this part of the system that is having unintended impacts on this other part of the system? Embrace the whole person. So in my example for Horizon Health and the Active Offer, allow people to bring their stories, their experiences, their assumptions, and their judgments and their feelings about those things into the conversation. Not just the facts, what do we know, what do the stats say, what does the research say, you know, how should we move forward, but actually to be a human being in the conversation. To recognize right and responsibility. And so when I say that, I want you to think about a conversation when people show up with their opinion and they tell you what they need to say and they give their view or they offer their judgments or their assumptions. That matters. That kind of goes to this thing we often hear when we talk about conversational leadership, which is about, you know, being heard. Being heard matters. But I think in a brave, honest conversation, we need to go beyond being heard, that is insufficient for us to create connection, build understanding, and increase trust. We actually need people to bring their thing, their opinion, their view, their need, and bring the responsibility to understand their neighbors or their colleagues or their, you know, fellow patient or family members' needs and hopes and concerns as well. We need to ask more of people so that it's not just about them, it's actually about them and others. That's how we create that connection and that understanding. Meaningful inclusion, you know that saying, if everyone is thinking alike, then no one is thinking. Well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a diversity of perspective and diversity of viewpoint in the conversation. So not just saying, oh, did we have, one patient from this kind of illness and one patient from that illness, but actually are they bringing different stories and experiences? Are they coming from different backgrounds and walks of life? Are they going to share different things with us? So all of those kinds of things coming from a place of compassion and integrity and doing it again and again. I want you to think about brave, honest conversations as not getting it perfect, but making progress. That when we create a pattern of being in these conversations with each other, it allows us to talk about things, anything that comes up together. But if we aren't in the practice of creating that pattern, it becomes much harder for us to do. So here's a couple of tips and insights and ideas from my experience about things you can do in a brave, honest conversation. So for starters, it matters that you welcome emotion, that we make it okay to feel strongly about things, that we welcome diversity of views and perspectives, that we focus on the human beings in the conversation first. We create connections between people so they see each other as human beings versus getting right to the issue or right to the facts or how do we solve this or what are we going to do moving forward, but actually just step back for a second and see each other as full human beings. We create new norms about bringing our whole selves to a conversation, and so that means the people in the conversation, but that also means you as a leader, that you bring your whole self to the conversation, that we create that shift for something to happen, for that understanding, the connection, and the trust to be built so that we can solve the problem, and that we deal with feelings first, facts second. And so I said earlier that I'm a really firm believer that facts don't make people feel better. And it doesn't, and so I want to be really clear, I'm not saying facts don't matter. Facts matter. They hugely matter in the conversation, of course. But it matters that you allow people's humanity and their experience and their stories and the emotions that go with those things to be the first thing that you welcome into the conversation, and that the facts take second seat. When I referenced that active offer conversation, we didn't go right to how do we make this happen? What do we need to do differently? How are we going to solve this problem? That's a fact-based approach. Instead, we focused on how have you been impacted? How did that make you feel? What do you hope might be different? What role might you want to play in creating change? What does change look like to you? So that people focused on their feelings related to the issue first, and then we got to facts. You'll get to facts if you deal with feelings. You'll have a hard time moving forward on sustainable solutions if you're only in the fact-based place. Now, I'm talking about challenging conversations where there is emotion, that you might absolutely make huge progress in any kind of conversation that isn't grounded in feelings. So I just want to make that distinction. So I think it matters that you ask yourself, if those are some things you can do, it matters that you ask yourself, how do I want to lead? The title of this webinar is Bravely Leading Challenging Conversations. And I think it matters as the act of leadership that you ask yourself, how do you want to show up in these conversations? How do you bravely lead challenging conversations? And if the times that we're in is a time where outrage is the new norm and reactivity is really common and the emotional temperature is high, it matters that you ask yourself, what is this moment or this conversation calling for from you? How do you need to show up in this particular moment? Because in my experience in 25 years of doing this work around the world, it's a beautiful thing when you're well-rested and well-fed and feeling perfectly calm and peaceful and everything in your world is aligned so you can step in and bravely lead these challenging conversations. But in my experience, that's pretty rare. And so sometimes you're leading from what the world or the situation has given you, and you still have to show up and lead these conversations. We'll share a link of a speech I gave last year in Minneapolis, and so you can watch the entire story I'm about to share. But I want to just give you an example of what I mean by what is this moment calling for from you, and how do you want to show up in these conversations. I did a project for a number of years for provincial power authorities, And they hired us to transform the conflict between this power authority and an Indigenous community. And in one of the visits into this community, about halfway through the project, about a year and a half, 2-year project, we flew into this community to learn that a number of youth in the community had just killed themselves, committed suicide. And so we knew that the conversation we were going to be hosting and holding in this conversation wasn't about the conflict and how do we transform the conflict, or how do they be better neighbors with this organization. And instead we were going to be holding space for the tragedy and harm and challenge that had happened in this community. And 2 days into that visit, it's a fly-in, fly-out community for the most part, I got a phone call. Just take a breath for a second. I got a phone call advising me that my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter at the time, had just tried to kill herself. And in that moment, I had a choice. I mean, first, all that stuff comes up, the shame and the fear and the guilt, and all of that stuff comes up about being a mother in that situation. Also, the recognition I wasn't getting out because the plane wasn't coming back for another 5 days. And so I had a choice in that moment, and I'm abbreviating this story for the timing of the webinar. And if you want to hear the whole one, you can go to that link that's been shared. But I had a choice. I could have chosen not to be in the conversation with the community because I needed to pull back because of my own pain, which is a perfectly fine choice. I'm not saying you have to choose to lead challenging conversations when you are hurting yourself. But that was one path I could have taken. I could have chosen to tell people about my own situation, or I could have just chosen to feel what I was feeling and to be with them in their own pain. And so I chose the third. And so in no way am I saying that was the right choice. It's just the choice I made. Because in these challenging conversations we lead, there's not always a right and a wrong choice. There's just the choice you make that you choose to step into. And so I chose to feel what I was feeling and to channel it into being able to be with other people who were in pain, not telling them what had happened to me, but really stepping into compassion and to courage to hold the space for them. That life happens like that. Your conversations happen like that. And so sometimes it really goes back to how do you want to show up in these conversations, especially when maybe the situation isn't what you would wish for. And how do you still be of service to other people who need to talk about tough stuff? And so that's just an example that, in every given situation, you're always going to have a choice. And your choice in a situation might be maybe you are hurting, but being connected to what you are feeling might allow you to be of better service to other people who are feeling something similar. So thanks for listening and allowing me to share that little bit of a story. So that goes to the leadership aspect. I think people always come to a conversation about brave, honest conversations wanting to know what can they do, what actions can they take, what new skills can they have. And in the end, I think skills matter. Skills and knowledge really matter, but it also matters very much how you show up. And that's leadership, the choice you make to really be in the conversation. So that's the difference between doing with a focus on being. And that's 50%, I think, of the conversation, how you lead challenging conversations. So be willing to fail, be willing to get it wrong. Recognize you're always at choice when you step forward to be in the conversation. Challenge the status quo about what it means to be a leader. Like, be a fully human leader. Be a leader with compassion and integrity and feelings yourself. Hold the space and stay. Stay with the tough stuff. You can't actually get to connection, understanding, and trust without being in the mess of a tough conversation. And we so often want to go to harmony and smoothing it over and making it easier for people. And actually, when we stay with the hardest stuff, we find solutions. We find the ability to move forward together, even when we're hugely polarized and have totally different viewpoints. And also, as a leader, take the time to take care of yourself, to watch out for the toll that it takes to hold these conversations. I always say that the work I do is sort of like holding space for brave, honest conversations. I use those words a lot, holding space. And I think it really matters that you recognize that if you don't put the space down, if you just keep holding space, it can get really heavy over time. It's astonishing how heavy it can get. And so it matters that you take care of yourself, because your ability to bravely lead these conversations diminishes the less time you take taking care of yourself, finding an open heart. Which leads me to, we're going to send you a link to this video I've posted. We tried to play it, and it gets a little choppy in the webinar, so we're going to send you this link. I did an event in May, and I'm doing this event again in November, called Gather, 5 days of brave, honest conversations online. And one of the things I did during this event was interview speakers of really experts who I believe are holding the space for brave, honest conversations, to really bravely lead challenging conversations. And one of the speakers that I interviewed, there's videos available of her, like full-length videos, is Mayor Lisa Helps from the city of Victoria. And I asked her what was her advice to people wanting to bravely lead challenging conversations. And she said this thing that resonates with me and repeats all the time, that it matters that you don't armor up. So when you armor up for a brave, honest conversation, you create a barrier and a space between you and other people. That actually the most effective way to show up to bravely lead these conversations is to be relentlessly open-hearted. And I think that's such a testament to how we actually create a space that allows people to be in this with us, so that we are in it together. And being relentlessly open-hearted invites other people to do the same, which allows us to build connection and understanding and trust, and then, of course, to solve the problems that we're facing because we have that connection and trust. So I welcome you to just click that YouTube link and watch that short little clip. I want to leave you with this question, because I have used the word brave and courage constantly throughout this, the 30 minutes of this webinar. And I think this is a question that takes a lot of reflection on personally to find your own leadership style, so you can show up authentically to bravely lead challenging conversations. How do you find your own courage? And what does that courage look like to you? What does it mean to be brave? I know that for me, my definition of brave is being afraid and doing it anyway, and being committed to something else more than my fear, to being of service, to holding the conversation, to making sure people have a right to a voice, more than I am afraid of being in a room full of angry people or afraid of not solving the problem. So being committed to something more than my fear, it means being vulnerable myself, being really open to whatever's going to happen in the conversation, and recognizing that I too am a human being in the conversation. So I want to plant that seed that this is a life's work, I think, and a way of living, having brave, honest conversations. And I would encourage you to ask yourself those questions, spend some time reflecting on it. I am super excited to let you know that I am coming to Saskatchewan in the fall. I'm going to host a 2-day workshop. It's a leadership workshop on brave, honest conversations in Saskatoon on November 28th and 29th. And you can, if you're interested in taking that, because you've been on this webinar, you can go to the registration link, and if you enter the code Saskatoon under the section that says discount code, you can have $200 off the training. I'm also running a course from the International Association of Public Participation, dealing with opposition and outrage, in Regina on September 19th and 20th, and the same thing applies there. You can enter the code Regina in the coupon code and take $200 off of that training. And I encourage you that if you're interested in continuing to learn and grow and dive deeper into brave, honest conversations, I'm running that event Gather from November 4th to 8th online. And the Q1 Power Hour folks have shared the link to registration there in the chat room. I would be really thrilled to take burning questions that have come up with you, observations, comments, concerns, things you are challenged with or opportunities you need help with. So I'm happy we've got a couple minutes to take some questions, and I'd offer some answers. And I'm also happy to connect after this webinar. You can send me an email, or you can, throw something out there. I'd be really happy to stay connected after this. So I'm just going to go to the first question that has shown up. Jocelyn asks, even if you're ready to hold a brave, honest conversation, what if the other person or people won't participate in a challenging conversation, or worse, do participate, but in a discriminatory or hurtful way? Thank you, Jocelyn. That is such a true question and such a common concern. So I guess I would answer that by saying, just because you're ready doesn't mean other people are ready. And people only change behavior through a combination of experience and conversation. So conversation that leads to understanding. So I think it's about baby steps, to actually step into the conversation and give people experience of talking together in this way, that it's safe and it's possible. Maybe start with some of the easier issues that you need to deal with, or only start with their experience and their impact and their stories and feelings related to it. Plan that the conversation needs to be ongoing, because of course they're never ending, right? Invariably, a brave, honest conversation doesn't solve your problem or shift people's views. You need to have them over time. People need to feel differently in a brave, honest conversation than they do in a normal conversation. So if you can hold that in your head, what do you want them to feel, and how do you create a space that allows them to happen? If people do participate in a discriminatory or hurtful way, there's a real opportunity to start the conversation with that question. What do we each need to be in this conversation? Or go deeper, what would make this a safe space for you? And how do we hold a safe space for each other in this conversation? And surface those things. I've had people say to me, well, I'm really concerned about integrity in this process. So then start the conversation with that. What makes this an ethical space? What would allow you to walk away from this conversation feeling like there was an integrity in the conversation? So those are a couple of quick thoughts. It's a big question. It's a really big question, but those are a couple of quick thoughts to that. I'm just reading through the chat room. Recognizing the detrimental effects of not having the conversation. Seeing the value in going there is motivation. Initiating, committing to it seems to be the hard part. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think sometimes it needs to come back to actually what harm are we causing? What unintended harm are we causing by not talking about these issues? It becomes really quick and really easy to see the harms you're causing, right? People are disconnected. Performance is declining. Results are slowing down. We're not making progress. We have conflict in our organization. Like, as soon as you can articulate those things, sometimes it creates an impetus or a motivation for choosing to step in. Oh, I recognize the name, Susan Dunn. It's just, thank you very much for saying lovely things about me, Susan. Stephanie is an amazing, thoughtful, and supportive facilitator. Her workshops are valuable opportunities. Thank you very much for the cheer from Nova Scotia, Susan. Another question. I think it gets easier the more you initiate it. Absolutely. It sets the stage for future conversations. Yeah, absolutely. I often say, people say, well, when will I be as confident as you to be able to step forward and hold these conversations? And so I want to just burst that bubble. I've been doing this work for 25 years, and like really high stakes, high emotion conversations. And I would offer that I don't get less afraid. I am rarely confident, like in my ability. What I am is committed to the conversation, committed to the people in the room. That thing I said earlier, what are you committed to more than your fear? I am committed to that, to people and to their needs and their fears and their uncertainties and their pain, and for us to be in that conversation so we can figure it out together. And that allows me to just do it rather than to wait for the moment when I feel confident and comfortable. It gets more familiar over time, but waiting for the moment, that I suddenly wake up and think, oh my God, today I've got it all covered. I don't ever think that. But if you do, congratulations. I think that's awesome, and maybe you can share your secrets with us. It's just about choosing to step in. Just step in, see what happens. It's like as an experiment with curiosity and compassion and what happens in the conversation when you just step forward. Because the thing is, the things we're not talking about, or the things that we should be talking about but we're not talking about, but focused on compassion or caring in brave, honest ways, those things are running our lives. And there is a yearning, like a deep yearning for people to talk about the stuff that matters. People want to be in those conversations. You just need to open the door to create the space to prove to them that you can do it, that they can do it, that they can be in a different kind of discussion. So someone has said, what are your best public participation techniques for de-escalating outrage and refocusing the conversation? So from a facilitator perspective and large group process, some of my best techniques are, number one, a technique called the Socratic Circle. So I'll send it to Carolyn, who can send it to you and follow up. I wrote a blog, it's on my website, and it's actually a technique I created quite a few years ago in order to create a space for community to come together to talk about the impacts of natural disaster. And so that was the impetus for creating the Socratic Circle. But I've used it in countless situations, like I used the Socratic Circle for the Canadian Blood Services in a conversation about their blood donation policy for men who have had sex with other men, and bringing together LGBTQ community members and blood donation recipient groups to talk about it. So it's like a real container for emotion to talk about how we really feel, to tell our stories. Also, the open space, if you're familiar with that. All of these techniques you can Google and find. Anything that, talking circles of coursework, anything that is creative in focus, that allows people to access that other side of their brain. So mind mapping, graphic facilitation, using photos or like photo voice, those kinds of techniques. Let me see what else people have said. Oh no, Socratic Circle, not diplomatic circle, Socratic Circle. And I'll send you a link to my website that has a blog on sort of do's and don'ts and how to set it up. I'll send that link to people. What other questions are there? Kelly has said, a great source of wisdom. Oh, thank you, Kelly. It's lovely to recognize your name on this. A great source of wisdom you are, Stephanie, loving the idea of how you make people feel it is a different conversation, not a normal conversation. Yeah, if I have more to share on that idea, I think that the space we create, like the actual physical, emotional space we create, needs to feel different. If people are going to talk about a tough thing, then there needs to not be a barrier between them. So think about spaces where you remove the table. Think about spaces where you serve food first, where we break bread together. Think about opportunities for people to come in and out that focus on comfort and reflection. Think about conversations that start with listening to music or to a moment in quiet reflection and meditation, if you can push your organization to that moment, to that space, a mindful moment for how do we want to feel when we leave this conversation. So the actual environment and the tone that you create should be different in order to allow people to access, to dig deeper, to bring more of themselves, to get beyond the stories that they're telling themselves into the stories that you need to recreate. So think about the physical and the emotional space you want to create. Another question, do you have any examples of organizations whose cultures are doing really well to support brave, honest conversation? That's a really, really great question. And so I guess I would say yes, but I would say it's in pockets. I don't know very many organizations who across the board are in every department doing fantastically well. But there are some organizations who are really stepping forward with great strides. So an organization I'd point to is actually the Yukon Territorial Government. in many of their departments, they are stepping directly into both leadership development about what does it mean to be a leader and a different kind of leader that the world needs now. So their leadership competencies have distinctly changed to hold that space, to focus on compassion and integrity and those kinds of things, and also the ability to talk in their organizations and with communities about that kind of thing. So the Yukon Territorial Government, let me think of some other organizations. Well, I gave you the example of Horizon Health, specifically when it comes to the example of the active offer, and I only say that because that's the only project I can point to. The organization is full of exceptionally committed people who are doing that kind of work. Let me think about that, and I'll see if I can think of some other organizations doing really good work like that across the board, across the organization. Alberta Health Services is doing some really exceptional work when it comes to working with LGBTQ community members, doing work on safe injection sites. So some of their work in talking about those really tough conversations and shifting priorities. So that's kind of more of a project or issue example. Another question. Do you know of any communities of practice who steward this work and that we could continue to learn with or from, or any other resources you recommend? That's a great question, Maura. No, I guess that's the short answer. So, I mean, I send out a monthly newsletter with lots of resources and information. But I think that's a great idea and a really great, there's a real need for it. And certainly there's a yearning for it to come together with peers who are struggling to do this work and to create these connections. Maybe we should create one. Maybe you are the catalyst for us needing to build that space. And or maybe Q1 Power Hour acts as that, or as a catalyst to that. Thank you for raising that. I think I said that this work is a life's work. It's a way of living in your organization, in your community, but also in your life. And so it really helps to be able to lean into others and to reach out with your challenges and your struggles and your, oh my God, I'm stepping into this conversation. What the heck do I do? So thanks for raising it, because of course the more of us that are doing it, the better we get at it, the more practice we have. Any other questions? I know I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn in a minute to close us, but anything else that's burning? And it's not a speak now or forever hold your peace. Please, you have my email and my contact information. I'm really happy for folks to reach out and to share. Oh, thank you, Susan. She says in the health sector, there is the National Health Engagement Network. Thank you very much, Susan. Could you maybe share with people how they connect into that, or where they go through? Where's the access point for them if they don't know about the network?
Okay, with that, Stephanie, I think we'll wrap up. I want to say, just on behalf of everyone on the call today, thank you so much for sharing with us the lessons you've learned, not only through your years of working in this space, but also some of your personal experiences. I think we all really appreciated hearing everything you could share with us here today. I think what really resonates for me is some of the points that you shared, in particular around that nobody is born knowing how to have these kinds of conversations, but we have an opportunity, each and every one of us, to influence others that we surround ourselves with by choosing how we show up and by practicing that and doing it over and over again. So thank you so much for joining us here today for QI Power Hour.
Oh, thank you so much.
I do have just a couple of slides just to end us off here. And just a note to all those on the call today, so you can all be jealous, but all of our QI Power Hour speakers here do receive a highly coveted speaker gift of these I Heart QI socks, which you may have seen on Twitter or elsewhere. But just a note to say that if you yourself would like to get your hands on a pair of these beautiful socks, we also invite you to become a QI Power Hour speaker yourself. And if you have a topic that you think our community of learners would be interested in, we'd love to hear from you. So please visit the link that Chelsea is going to share out in the chat here in order to pitch us your idea for a topic. And then finally, we just want to invite you to join us next month for QI Power Hour, where we're going to be welcoming Colleen Christopherson-Cote, the coordinator for the Saskatoon Poverty Reduction Partnership. Over the past 18 months, the Saskatoon Poverty Reduction Partnership has worked to listen to a diverse group of community, sector, and service agencies to develop the 12 bold ideas to eliminate poverty in Saskatoon. Poverty is a complex social issue that is directly tied to racism, systemic inequalities, human rights, and system policies and practices. Working together to disrupt, dismantle, and rethink the mechanisms that perpetuate poverty and cycles of inequality is a critical next step in eliminating poverty in Saskatoon and across the world. So we invite you to register for this session, and we've provided the link in the chat for you. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today, and we wish you a safe and happy rest of your week. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you.